Welcome to this important day and this magnificent setting. We're honored to have all of you with us, and as well as many people watching online. And today we have many special guests. We're thrilled to say that we have ambassadors from 13 different countries and diplomats from many more, as well as officials from the White House, the Departments of Treasury, State, and Justice, and the United States Congress. And, of course, a special welcome to our most honored guests, our Holocaust survivors. This institution is first and foremost a place of memory. That's why we're in this room today. But it demands that we remember for a purpose, and it demands that that purpose is not solely to mourn the dead and regret the horrible failures of the past. No, the museum demands that we also remember for the sake of the future. It asks us to think about what went wrong, what can be learned, what can be different, perhaps most crucially, what is my role? 100 years ago this month, the international community gathered in Paris to discuss the treaty that would settle what was called the War to End All Wars, World War I having so exceeded all prior thresholds of mass death and destruction. Commenting on the proceedings in Paris that led to the Versailles Treaty, a British official quipped that it was really more like the peace to end all peace. And tragically, he was so right. Within 20 years, the Germans would invade Poland, launching a Second World War, the most destructive event in human history, including the murder of millions of innocent civilians for racial or political reasons. And although that British official back in 1919 could imagine another war, no one at the time could imagine what we now call the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million men, women, and children solely because they were Jewish. It's often said that before World War I, if one had to predict which European nation would launch a deadly mass assault on Jews, the answer would have been overwhelmingly Russia, or perhaps some might have said France. Yet within 22 years of the Versailles Treaty, genocidal anti-Semitism became the state policy of one of the most advanced, educated nations in the world. In those intervening years, Germany had been struggling with the humiliation of defeat, economic instability, and fear of communism. The world was undergoing rapid change, and in such time, we humans always seek certainty and, of course, scapegoats, as the Jews have been for 2 millennia. The Nazis exploited the tumultuous moment, providing simple answers to complex questions, a proud new national identity for Germany, and a hopeful future for those they considered racially pure Germans. It was not clear in 1919 or even in 1939 exactly where things were headed. The study of Holocaust history helps us look back and see where warning signs were missed, where unintended consequences were ignored, where wishful thinking prevailed. And this looking back is exactly what we owe the victims, to remember their lives, to remember the horror of their deaths, and to remember, most of all, that we failed them. We cannot fail them again by forgetting. We cannot fail them again by ignoring the rising anti-Semitism and distortion and politicization of the Holocaust in Europe and elsewhere. We cannot fail them again by not learning from our failures. When we look back in history, it must be to see who was lost. It must be to see what happened, and what failed to happen, and it must be to see ourselves. And now it is my privilege to introduce a great friend of this institution, Her Excellency, Dr. Emily Haber, who last June became Germany's ambassador to the United States. Emily?
Sarah Bloomfield, most honored guests, those who survived the atrocities we are remembering today, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On January 27, 1945, Red Army units liberated the inmates of the Auschwitz concentration camp. The Nazi regime was not yet vanquished, but would soon be. Other concentration camps continued to exploit and kill, some with an added sense of the impending end, some to conceal the evidence. So, although the Holocaust had not yet stopped for good on this day in January 1945, the liberation of Auschwitz and the pictures of emaciated survivors and starved victims that came with it was so emblematic that this January 27th became the main day of remembrance for the victims, but also a day of commitment to never letting this happen again. To a certain degree, the war effort had obscured what was happening. Now the world woke up to the horrible reality of the near-complete destruction of European Jewry on the European continent at the hands of a German regime that conquered and ruled by terror. We are looking back at the darkest chapter of my country's history. I feel conflicting emotions standing here and speaking to you as German ambassador in the Holocaust Museum on International Holocaust Remembrance Day in the presence of an ever-diminishing community of survivors and their descendants and friends. It's painful. It's an honor to be invited. It's difficult. It's a duty, but without the sense of satisfaction that comes from a duty fulfilled. German ambassadors before me have been in the same situation in terms of the enormity of what happened, as they will be after me. In particular, for the few survivors from Eastern Europe. Our relations with many survivors and their descendants are, I dare say, mostly good, especially here in the US, but they will never be normal. Germany may again be a respected and well-integrated member of the international community, but on this day, and confronting the Holocaust, we are and remain alone. When, after Auschwitz, the last concentration camps were finally liberated, this was the end of the killing. But it was not the end of the Holocaust. It was not the end for Jews who continued to live in the shadow of horrors suffered. In particular, for the few survivors from Eastern Europe, whose incredibly rich world had been all but annihilated. And for German Jews, who had contributed so much to Germany's cultural and intellectual life. It was not an end for Jewish people across the world, in what would become Israel, in the United States, who had lost families, relatives, friends in the Holocaust, close relations they may have tried but failed to save. And indeed, it was not an end for Germans. Perpetrators, profiteers, onlookers, bystanders, or the very young or later generations. They went on to live with direct or inherited responsibility and, literally over decades, were confronted with newly unearthed facts, the unmasking of prominent and extremely important, the unmasking of often trusted public figures as accessories to the crimes of the Third Reich. However, for a long time, perhaps more than 30 years, openly confronting the totality of what had happened was limited to certain elites, until perhaps 1979 and 1985, two movies, Holocaust and Shoah, changed everything. Literally in one fell swoop, Holocaust forced the entire population of Germany to own up to the crimes committed by their country and in the name of Germans. It became clear this history has no end. No end, certainly, but maybe we can discern some new beginnings. Survivors were able to bring, if not their material culture, which was irretrievably lost, then their spiritual and intellectual inheritance to mainly the US and Israel, but also to other parts of Europe and the world. And even in Germany, there is now again a Jewish community, not nearly comparable in size to pre-Holocaust times, but growing and increasingly visible. It is something we are very proud of. In this context, I know you are concerned about rising anti-Semitism, but multiplying manifestations of anti-Semitism in Europe, also in Germany. I fully share this concern. But at the same time, I'm deeply confident that we will be able to overcome it because we remember. And this brings me back to why we are gathered here. We remember. But we have to remember consciously, actively, as it were. It is now 74 years since the liberation of Auschwitz. This is about the span of a human life. In terms of active generations, in particular political generations, we are looking back at 3 or 4 generations. Between them, there are enormous discontinuities as regards political and social change, systems of values, ways and means of communication. Remembrance alters as contexts change. Knowledge expands, crises unfold. Fewer and fewer survivors are here with us to share their personal stories of survival and to speak to the heart. Demographies change through immigration, and immigrants may be unwilling to adopt or adapt to collective biographies. It is obvious that all of this will pose new challenges to remembrance. It does not diminish its relevance. Quite the contrary. It will require additional and different approaches, and their relevance will grow if we take the moral imperative of remembrance seriously. We owe it to those who have suffered or were murdered, and we owe it to those too who suffer in our day and time, and we owe it to ourselves and our children. As Sarah Bloomfield has said, for the sake of our future. We have to convince young people that generational distance does not diminish the moral legacy of the history of the Holocaust. We have to convince immigrants, if not to embrace, then to accept the responsibility which flows from our collective biography in our society and its context. We have to persuade them that, in the German case, responsibility for the Holocaust has become part of who we are and how we want to be, and what we believe is right and wrong, and therefore non-negotiable. This museum is a testament to how we can continue to sustain awareness of history, how to educate, how to pass on experiences from the past to future generations. And I would like to express my gratitude to Sara Bloomfield and the museum staff, the representatives of the Holocaust Museum, for their monumental efforts to keep this part of history in our shared memory. The work you've done over the past years to educate the public is invaluable. My country is honored to work with you in what we feel is a shared calling. It is with particular gratitude that I turn now to Louise Lawrence-Israëls, a Holocaust survivor, who will speak to us in a minute. Louise Lawrence-Israëls was a small child when her parents made the greatest decision to escape deportation to the camps by going into hiding in the Netherlands. She would know until much later how truly lucky she was by the action they took. Louisa has been sharing her personal experiences during the Holocaust with visitors at the museum and with audiences around the country for more than 25 years as a dedicated volunteer. And today we are the beneficiaries of her willingness to retell her history and to help us see the meaning it has for our lives and for our future. It's my privilege to introduce Louise Lawrence-Israëls.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I was born in 1942 in Haarlem, the Netherlands. When I was about 6 months old, the trains deporting Dutch Jews to the death camps in Poland were running almost daily. In order to try to save our family, my mom, my dad, my 2-year-older brother, and myself, my father decided that we should go into hiding. It was too dangerous to stay in Haarlem. Our family had received orders from the Gestapo to move to Amsterdam. With the help of some of my father's trusted friends, my father found an attic on top of a set of row houses in Amsterdam. He thought that it would be a safe place. It had its own entry to 4 sets of steep flights of stairs, and it was across the street of the main park in Amsterdam. My father was the only one who would have to leave when we needed food, medicine, and sometimes he brought back news. News could give the adults hope. My mom and her friend who stayed with us, who had lost her family earlier, and my brother and I never left the attic. We lived in the attic for almost 2.5 years. My mom cooked on a camping stove, if there was food to cook. We did not have a kitchen, and we only had a very small toilet, it's like a stall, with a sink with cold running water. We had no proper bathroom. My parents never told my brother and myself about the outside world. We had no idea that we were persecuted. We had no idea that we were Jewish, and we had no idea that the adults lived in constant fear. Our parents wanted us to be happy children without worries. We used to sit around the table, which was one of the very few pieces of furniture that we had, and while my mom and her friend were sewing and mending, they also played games with us. I realized later that the games were a form of homeschooling. We had some frightening moments, and being hungry and cold during especially the last winter, seemed normal to my brother and I. We didn't know better. After we were liberated in May 1945 by the Canadian Army, my parents waited a few days to take us outside. They wanted to be sure that it was safe for us. Going outside for the first time was the most difficult moment for my brother and I. We followed my dad down all those stairs, and when he opened the door, the sun blinded us. We missed the 4 walls, no more security. We were so afraid, we cried and asked to be taken back upstairs. But children are resilient, and with the help of Hershey bars, given to us by Canadian soldiers, we kind of adjusted to a different life. My parents never forgot their fears all their lives. They brought us up to be cautious and to look over our shoulders. But they never wanted to talk about the war years or about all the relatives that were murdered. All of the Dutch people worked very hard to rebuild a country that had absolutely nothing. My dad had to rebuild the family business, but took about 8 years. Earning a living for the family and education for the children was most important for my parents. I came to the United States in 1967 with my American husband. After my husband retired from the United States Army, we settled in the DC area. The Holocaust Museum had just opened, and I thought volunteering there would be a good fit for me. But first, I had to tell my parents about my plans. My parents were in the Netherlands. My father surprised me with his answer. He said, "It's a good idea that you volunteer in the Holocaust Museum. If we do not speak about it now, there will be a time that people will say that the Holocaust never happened." When people ask me today why I tell my experience, I always answer, any adult or child that has heard a Holocaust survivor speak will always speak against deniers of the Holocaust. They will say it did happen. They heard it from a survivor who told the story. Holocaust memory must be secured. The history must be told over and over again. It is the responsibility of every nation to ensure that all their people are taught to speak up against injustice, bigotry, and hate wherever it occurs. It is the responsibility for everybody in all societies and in all countries to ensure the continued memory of the Holocaust. The historic sites related to the history are protected and preserved in all countries, that the Holocaust is taught in all schools, that Holocaust denial and distortion is called out when it occurs and named for what it is, anti-Semitism. Teaching the truth about the Holocaust is crucial for all. The world must always remember what happens when any society is driven by hate. It's a very tall order, but we cannot stop now. Thanks to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Holocaust education will continue, and the museum will tell our stories when we cannot do it anymore. I will always be grateful for the love that our parents gave us. Thank you.
Weise Winden mit ihr Gossen reißen Starker nog die wilde vlammen, als daarom scheu brennt. Und ich steht und guckt so sich mit verleden her. Und ich steht und guckt so sich und der Städtel brennt.
Good morning. I'm Major Tom Bortner, an officer of the United States Army and Virginia Guard. I am honored for the humble privilege to participate in what this day represents. I've been a member of multiple military units that traced their history through World War II. The US Army had the grim responsibility of being some of the first witnesses to these atrocities. This day and this museum are the connective tissue to future generations, even more specifically to military applications of national power, and how we, as a military, observe for future indicators, conduct deterrence, and respond accordingly. History repeats itself. The difficult lessons learned and documented in this museum must never be forgotten. As the Nazis and their collaborators did everything they could to take away dignity and freedom, and ultimately the lives of their victims, by reading names aloud, and these names will read our family and friends of Holocaust survivors here with us today, we seek to return their humanity to them. Sophia de Groot, Mayer de Groot, Rachel de Groot, David Hershkovitz, Vida Dvorshytska, David Rosenshine, Hermosa Benedore, Esther Toledano, Lieberman Miklos, Frim Moore, Vash Miklos, Vera Friedlander, Erna Friedlander, Sigmund Friedlander, Shlomo Mutterprol, Aaron and Hinda Mindel and family, David and Leah Goldfarb and family. Moshe Wax. Hannah Wax. Jacob Weiss. Golda Weiss. Mausha Weiss. Esther and Miriam Weiss. Hannah Weiss. I would now like to introduce Commander Ralph Ennis.
Good morning. My name is Ralph Ennis. I'm the commander in charge of training for the entire Metropolitan Police Department. It's an honor to be here today. And I'm proud to report to you that through a partnership with the Anti-Defamation League and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, every single member of the Metropolitan Police Department attends a tour and discussion surrounding the Holocaust in this museum. The solemn tour is designed to ensure that all of our members understand the importance of speaking up and acting against evil and injustice. We are forever grateful for our partnership, and I can assure you that every member of the Metropolitan Police Department will not forget. I'm now going to read the names of those who will never be forgotten. Arpa Grunwald, Laszlo Grunwald, Imre Grunwald, Silva Deutsch Bosch, Solomon Bosch, Ernst Arnaldi, Ludwig Kohn, Gertrude Kohn, Hans Rosentreter, Inga Rosentreter, Gesina Gompers Pollock, Eddie Gompertz, Arsted Israels, Zan Namek, Liesel Raskin, Ernst Raskin, Olga Schreiber-Littman, Irks Key, Ernst Feigl, Agnes Bornstein Feigl, Marianne Feigl, Erwin Petzel, and Henny Reif. I now would like to introduce the Chief of Police of the Maryland National Capital Park Police, Chief Mcswain.
Good morning, everyone. I'm also a retiree from the Montgomery County Department of Police after leaving as an assistant chief after serving for 30 years. And like my colleagues, we continue to also bring members of our respective agencies to the Holocaust Museum, that indeed we may be better public servants and represent the memories of those who have lost their lives. Approximately 15 years ago, my wife and I first visited the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. We initially thought our self-guided tour would only last but an hour, but we were immediately absorbed in the artifacts, historical significance of events portrayed, and the stories of human triumph. Thus, what we thought was going to be a 1-hour cursory scan turned out to be a 4-hour life-changing experience. 3 of the greatest lessons I have taken from the Holocaust over the years include one, that hate makes one blind to the sanctity of life. Evil flourishes when good people do nothing. And third, love is the only force on earth that can both move one from fear to action while simultaneously causing one to rise above the depravity of man. I will always be grateful for the courage, perseverance, and love that the Jewish community has demonstrated to the entire world. It is for these reasons that I am truly honored to take part in this remembrance ceremony. Esther Perlmutter, Ada Perlmutter, Monet Perlmutter, Esther Spitzer, Malka Spitzer, Rivka Bester, Shmuel Bester, Adolf Rosenfeld, Katie Rosenfeld, Tony Limburger, Anna Knoll, Heinrich Knoll, Hulda Dreimer, Leah Fogel, Mayor Fogel, Edith Fogel, Abram Horowitz, Manfred Horowitz, Felix Lefkowitz, Eliyahu Trom, Gita Trom, Benjamin Orenbook, Leah Orenbook. At this time, it gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. Harry Markowitz, both a Holocaust survivor and a museum volunteer, who will lead in the recitation of the memorial prayer.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה ועמד יברכרותי, ימליך מלכותי וחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל. בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם עלמי, יתברך וישתבח ויתברך ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתחדש ויתחלה ויתחלל שמי דקושה בריך הוא. לעילה מן כל ביחתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירם ועלמה. ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו amen. I'd like everyone to remain standing while we observe a moment of silence in the memory of all the victims of the Holocaust. Thank you. You may be seated. At the end of the program, we will have a memorial candle lighting led by Holocaust survivors and the ambassadors. Following them, we invite all attendees to light a candle.